Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the Gulf. How the Iran war could redraw the Middle East.
Welcome to The Bigger Perspective.
The airspace map updates first. Across aviation control centres from Doha to Dubai, red warning zones begin to appear across digital navigation screens. Flight paths bend away from contested corridors. Pilots receive new routing instructions. In Riyadh, security advisors gather around large tables covered with satellite imagery and economic briefings. Voices are calm, but the tone is unmistakably serious. Across the Gulf, oil terminals continue loading tankers beneath bright floodlights, but insurers are reassessing risk. Shipping companies are quietly reviewing contingency plans. Meanwhile, on the streets of Istanbul, televisions inside cafes broadcast breaking coverage. Analysts debate what the conflict could mean for the balance of power in the Middle East. The first effects of regional conflict rarely appear where the missiles land. They appear in airspace restrictions, in shipping routes, in diplomatic phone calls that begin earlier than planned. Because when tensions involving Iran escalate, the question extends beyond one country. It spreads across an entire regional system. The central question emerges quickly. If war involving Iran reshapes the strategic environment of the Middle East, how might Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the Gulf states respond? And could the region's balance of power shift in ways that last for decades? Today's episode examines how such a conflict could redraw political alignments, economic partnerships, and security strategies across one of the most strategically important regions on Earth.
The Middle East has always been defined by shifting balances of influence. For decades, Iran and Saudi Arabia have represented two competing centers of regional power. One is a revolutionary republic seeking strategic autonomy. The other is a monarchy that has traditionally aligned closely with Western security partnerships. Their rivalry has shaped conflicts from Lebanon to Yemen. But this rivalry is not purely ideological, it is also strategic. Iran's geographic position gives it influence along several key regional corridors, from the Persian Gulf to Iraq and Syria. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, controls the largest oil exporter capacity in the world and leads many of the Arab Gulf monarchies economically and diplomatically. Turkey introduces a third major actor. As a NATO member with a large industrial economy and one of the region's most capable militaries, Ankara operates with its own strategic priorities. Turkey often balances relations with Western allies, Russia, and Middle Eastern states simultaneously. Historically, wars in the Middle East have often reshaped regional hierarchies. After the 1991 Gulf War, the United States established a long-term military presence across Gulf states. The 2003 Iraq War altered the internal balance of power in Iraq and expanded Iranian influence in the region. Those events demonstrate a pattern. Regional conflicts rarely remain contained within national borders. They alter alliances, economic flows, and perceptions of power. Some analysts argue that modern economic interdependence makes large-scale regional war less likely. Others counter that the Middle East's overlapping rivalries create a system where escalation can involve multiple actors quickly. Both interpretations contain elements of truth. What remains clear is that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the Gulf states would face profound strategic choices if conflict involving Iran expanded. In the first scenario, conflict involving Iran remains limited in scope and duration. Initial military exchanges occur, but major regional powers exercise caution. Saudi Arabia increases defensive readiness while emphasizing stability in global energy markets. Gulf states coordinate security measures to protect shipping lanes and energy infrastructure. Diplomatic channels remain active behind the scenes. Turkey adopts a cautious position. Ankara has historically maintained complex relations with both Iran and Western partners. In a limited conflict scenario, Turkish leadership might prioritize mediation and regional stability rather than direct involvement. Financial markets respond quickly but stabilize once it becomes clear that energy infrastructure remains largely intact. Saudi Arabia's spare oil production capacity becomes particularly important in this environment. According to energy analysts, the kingdom has historically maintained the ability to increase output by roughly 2 to 3 million barrels per day during market disruptions. That flexibility could help calm global markets. Diplomatic initiatives might also emerge through regional forums or international mediation efforts aimed at preventing escalation. History provides precedent. During the so-called tanker war phase of the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, attacks on shipping increased dramatically. Yet, despite the danger, the Strait of Hormuz never fully closed. Global markets experienced volatility, but the system continued functioning. A controlled outcome today could follow a similar pattern. Tensions would remain high, military readiness would increase, alliances might tighten, but the regional order would remain broadly intact. Still, even a limited confrontation could leave lingering uncertainty, because once conflict begins in such a complex strategic environment, confidence becomes fragile. Initial conflict involving Iran begins to pull neighboring actors into the strategic calculation. Saudi Arabia faces growing pressure to respond more visibly, whether through defensive cooperation, expanded military coordination with allies, or increased regional leadership. Gulf states begin strengthening collective security measures. Missile defenses are activated. Naval patrols increase across critical shipping corridors. Intelligence cooperation intensifies. Turkey confronts a different dilemma. Ankara's geographic position connects Europe, the Middle East, and the Caucasus. Escalation across the region could affect energy pipelines, refugee movements, and trade routes that run through Turkish territory. At the same time, Turkey may see opportunity. Regional instability sometimes creates space for new diplomatic influence. And this is where the central question reappears. If conflict expands, could competing powers begin reshaping alliances across the Middle East itself? Beyond the immediate crisis lies a deeper question. What happens to the Middle East's balance of power after the conflict ends? Wars often accelerate strategic trends that were already underway. Saudi Arabia has spent the past decade expanding economic reforms and diversifying its international partnerships. A regional conflict could reinforce its role as a central, stabilizing energy supplier. Turkey may seek to expand diplomatic leverage between East and West. and Gulf states, particularly the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, have increasingly positioned themselves as global financial and logistics hubs. A prolonged conflict could intensify military investment across the region. Security cooperation agreements might deepen. Missile defense networks could expand. Naval presence across the Gulf and Eastern Mediterranean might increase. History shows how such shifts occur. The aftermath of the 1979 Iranian Revolution triggered decades of new security arrangements across the Gulf. Military infrastructure expanded dramatically during the following decades. Structural changes today might follow a similar trajectory, but long-term consequences extend beyond military strategy. Regional states could accelerate diversification away from oil dependence. New trade corridors could emerge linking Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. In other words, conflict might reshape not only political alignments but also economic geography. And yet structural change unfolds slowly. Infrastructure projects take years. Diplomatic trust takes even longer. Even after the crisis ends, its strategic echoes could continue shaping the region for a generation. What are your thoughts on today's analysis? We'd value your perspective. Share your insights respectfully in the comments below. Thoughtful discussion makes these conversations stronger. If you found this documentary informative and balanced, consider liking the video and subscribing for more in-depth global analysis. Until next time, thank you for watching.